Are we mollycoddling our children too much? A report out today suggests that children have less freedom now than previous generations, and they're stuck inside, watched over by overprotective parents.
Joining us now, our author and dad of two, Warwick, Cairns, who believes our worries are being blown out of proportion, and TV presenter and mum of two, Terri Dwyer, who is a self-confessed paranoid parent.
That's a good title, isn't it?
Yeah. So you two kind of come from different sides of the fence. I mean, Warwick, you've written a book, How to Live Dangerously, Why We Should All Stop Worrying and Start Living. So clearly you come from the side that we are all mollycoddling our kids.
Yeah.
We're not giving them the independence that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one study that you talked about today, but there's been studies year after year after year that show that since the 1970s, children's freedom has decreased. They used to be allowed to go out to play and do what they wanted and go where they wanted to. And every year, year by year, the area they've got to roam in gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Now they're trapped indoors. And, you know, we think we're keeping them safe, but there's more accidents happen in the home than out of home, really.
Well, you mentioned the survey today, and this is from child safety charity Streetwise.
Yeah.
They've surveyed 6,000 adults, 1,000 children. Quarter of children are not allowed to sleep over at a friend's house. 60% forbidden to use public transport without a parent. 43% can't visit a local park without their parent. And on average, children can walk to school on their own at 11, use public transport when they're 12, and babysit a sibling at 14. Now, those seem to be statistics that would make it appear that we're living in a much more dangerous world than we were living in back in the 1970s.
Sleepover? What's going to happen to your kids at a sleepover? I mean, I cannot understand why you would stop your children at 10 or 11 going to sleep at a friend's house.
But I don't think it's so much that parents are worrying about accidents so much as them actually hurting themselves. I think the biggest fear as a parent is that, obviously, you know, with everybody's worrying that they're going to get abducted or there's going to be a paedophile there that's going to prey on your child or something like that because of the media, and we're flash these
But don't you
images
think
all the
it's
time.
more of a fear for women, for parents, for mothers? I mean, I don't know. I know you're liberal and I'm the opposite side of the fence, but I just think because my husband's kind of a little bit more like you, but you know, we carry them, we nurture them for all that time, and then they come out in this precious little bundle, and you don't want anything to happen to them. And children these days, they're growing up too quickly. I mean, there was that chaos not long ago where, you know, there was the padded bras, 7-year-olds wanting to wear G-strings and padded bras. What's wrong with them catching a bus 2 years later?
Well, as a parent, you can prevent them from doing that, of course.
Yes.
But I mean, you've got two sons, Terri.
Yes.
They're 4 and 6 months old.
Yeah.
And Warwick, you've got two girls, 14 and 10. So, you know, both of you speaking from experience, you describe yourself as a paranoid parent. How does that manifest itself?
Well, I mean, my father was a policeman, so I came from a very strict upbringing. You know, I wasn't allowed after dark until I was quite old. I don't feel that did any damage to me, and I suppose you learn from your parents' parenting. You take the bits out of it that you like. With Caden, which is my oldest, he's the 4-year-old, I mean, I taught him about stranger danger from a very young age, taught him how to, you know, ring 999 on the telephone if anything happened to me, and I don't feel that he lacks any less independence than other children his age. If he goes to the park, I'd rather go with him. If he's out in the garden,
when will you let him go on his own?
When he's probably 18, and then I'll chaperone. But he's my, you know, he's my first, and I might soften as he gets older. But
yeah, I get your point about mothers and fathers as well. I think, you know, in many families there's that dynamic between them,
and that's why it works.
But yeah, it is. But I mean, my children, actually, when I'm meant to be looking after my children, my eldest daughter in particular, who's now 16, she was 14 when I wrote the book, but she has been to hospital twice when I was meant to be looking after her. So once she dropped a rock on her finger, and took the end of her finger off and had to stitch it back on again. The other time I watched her on the top of a skateboard ramp, trying to see what happens if you try to go down it on a scooter towed by a dog. What happens is you break your foot and have to go to hospital. But I think...
So some people would say, oh, you're a bit reckless to let your child do that.
Yeah, but now they know what hurts. And they don't, you know, well, it means that when they don't push it...
Surely they'd learn what hurts. I mean, really, you're not trusting them to actually learn from, you know, kind of worded behaviour rather than actual action.
Well, there was a study in your book, a study done in Sweden, and I think it was in a playground, and it explained...
Absolutely. What they did, they got a wild playground. There's a school in Sweden. It'll be closed down in England in about a week. But what it was, they said no teachers are allowed to go there. We're putting all these hazardous building materials like logs and rocks and all sorts of stuff like that, and off you go, children, and you know, do what you want there. In the first week or two, there were 2 broken legs. After that, no accidents at all, no injuries, because you learn.
But we hear about those kind of studies, but then you don't hear about the antithesis to that, because kids who had a safe playground would learn by...
Safe playgrounds are more dangerous. Honestly, trust me, because in the 1980s, we don't see these things nowadays, adventure playgrounds.
Yeah.
Okay, adventure playgrounds in the 1980s used to attract lower insurance premiums, and the reason is there were fewer accidents, despite the fact they're more dangerous. Because you learn, you think, actually, that's a big risk, I won't take that.
But bones are much stronger the older they get. If you're going to break them when they're a little bit older.
Well, it's interesting, if we look at, let's take, for instance, violent deaths. The research conducted at the University of Bournemouth shows that the number of children dying of violent deaths in England and Wales has fallen by 40% since the mid-1970s, with the annual number of deaths of children aged 14 and under falling from 136 to 84. So you're more likely to die of violent death in the 1970s. But isn't that because
we're mollycoddling them?
Mollycoddled.
Yeah. There are also many more. Well, firstly, the short-term deaths. There's accidents in the home, but also the long-term health effects. So that you may not. There's the odd chance you'll be less likely to run over, because if you don't go to the house, you won't be hit by a car.
Traffic is the biggest killer of 15 to 19-year-olds.
There's a much. Actually, I'll talk about 15 to 19-year-olds in a moment. But there's a much greater chance that you will get fat, you'll be unhappy, your life expectancy will be shortened as you reach adulthood. But 15 to 19-year-olds is interesting. Now their accident rate is quite high, and the reason is because when they're kept indoors, they don't learn road safety at the age of 10, 11 or 12. So the rate of accidents amongst 15 to 19-year-olds isn't declining by anywhere near as much as other ages, because that's the first time they're allowed it on their own, and they just haven't learned road sense.
What are the chances, and these are your figures that we read in your book, of you being abducted?
Yeah. Well, my first thing is most abductions are not by strangers. Most abductions by estranged parents and things like that. But to be abducted by a stranger, if you're a really bad parent, I hate my kids, I'll put them outside and let them be abducted. On the average, there's 12 million kids in Britain today, and the number of abductions is very small. So you'd have to leave your kid outside for 200,000 years.
But isn't that because we are mollycoddling them? Isn't that because the statistic is low because we are wrapping them in cotton wool and we're not subjecting them to, you know, the dangers that society
But the number of potential abductors isn't going to massively increase. I mean, it's you know, there aren't that many of them around.
Is it because the very public abductions that we see and we hear about are much more prevalent on the news now than perhaps they would have been?
I agree with you there. The number of abductions hasn't really changed since the 1970s.
It's just been reported more, haven't they?
They're reported more. And because of that, you think, oh, it's a much greater risk. Because when in the 1970s you saw news of it like once every blue moon, now you see it every day, every week.
But then it's our responsibility as parents, isn't it?